I've always said I came to the university back when the Earth's crust began to cool. You know, students have always said, Dean Burgett, when did you come to the university? I say, I came back when the Earth's crust began to cool. I came as a freshman violinist to the Eastman School of Music in 1964. This was a regional treasure who came from St. Louis, Missouri, right? I was a regional treasure, I'm a violinist. And and I was a good violinist, right? I mean, obviously I got into the Eastman School of Music. So I made my way to Rochester, and I went into one of the practice rooms, took my violin out, tuned it up, put the music on the stand, and began to play. Not practice, mind you, but play. The good stuff. The stuff that got me in the joint in the first place. And I left the practice room door open just a little bit, because I wanted all within earshot to appreciate this regional treasure that had arrived. So that lasted until the sophomores, juniors, seniors, graduate students, and faculty arrived, at which point my whole notion of talent was radically redefined. And I began waiting for the second letter from the admissions office, you know, the one in the thin envelope, telling me that a terrible mistake had been made, that the Paul Burgett that really intended to admit could play the violin, and asking me to leave preferably under the cover of darkness to spare us all the embarrassment. I'm sort of still waiting for the letter. It hasn't come yet, but you never know. So I'm really interested in this joint that educated me and then turned me loose to go out into its world, in this case, on its behalf. So where did we come from? Well, any good story begins with once upon a time. There was a guy by the name of John Wilder. So John Wilder was a member of the Board of Trustees of Madison University. He said, we need to move Madison University to Rochester. John Wilder and others thought that Madison University in Hamilton, New York wasn't going to have a future. Well, that proved to be wrong. Because in 1898, Madison University changed its name to Colgate. So we were born out of the rib of Colgate University. And Asa Hal Kendrick came from Madison University to Rochester. It is to him that we credit our motto. He found the term meliora in a quotation of the Roman poet Ovid. And the quotation that I had always heard was, Video meliora proboque. And video meliora proboque means, it translates to, I see and understand better things. Makes some sense, right? But there's a second half. And the second half is, and I still make bad choices. It's not very inspiring. Uh-oh. Well, maybe we need to do some more homework in it. And we played our first football game in that year, 1889. And that first football game was against Cornell. Score, Cornell 106, Rochester 0. So after the humiliation of our first, we played Syracuse, and the score was Rochester 36, Syracuse 6. So we sort of redeemed ourselves. George Eastman and his relationship with Rush Reese, unlike any relationship ever. He was not particularly a fan of higher education. He wasn't a product of higher education. His first gift to the university was in 1899. It was a camera. So in 1918, George Eastman says to Rush Reese, how would you like a music school? Well, you know, Rush Reese knew by that point to say yes to whatever Mr. Eastman was interested in. What did George Eastman do? He went out and bought a music school. He bought it for $28,000 and he gave it to the university for $1. George Eastman acquired the land that we know, where we know the Eastman School is now, and began the construction of the school building itself and the Eastman Theater. See this building? George Eastman wanted to acquire that property as well, and the guy who owned it was willing to sell it to him as part of the complex. But George Eastman thought that what the guy was asking was exorbitant, so he said, to hell with you, I'll just build my school and my theater around you, which is precisely, as you can see, what he did. I'd like to think that what we did when we opened up the East Wing, we dedicated it last year, that we finally completed what Mr. Eastman's original vision was. I'd like to think that Mr. Eastman, wherever his spirit is probably looking down now and saying, well, it sure took you long enough. All of his gifts exceed $51 million in 1932 dollars. If you adjust that for inflation, I think George Eastman arguably can be identified as the single most generous individual contributor to American higher education. We awarded our first PhD in 1925 in biochemistry. We awarded our second and third PhDs in 1927. One recipient of whom, Vincent Duvigneau, in biochemistry in 1927, went on to win the Nobel Prize. All of which, I think, established and enunciated to the higher education world that the University of Rochester was going to be a major player in research higher education in the United States. I am ever convinced even more strongly today, now that I know something about the past history, and as I associate with the current generation of students, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, that the university is in really good hands.